Lane Kirkland's Commencement Address to the University of South Carolina. I understand that commencement audiences are tolerant, to a degree, of speakers who reminisce and wax philosophical about what lessons they have picked up along the way about life and all that. As to the lessons of life, I can't improve on some lines from a Western movie called Missouri Breaks. Two cutthroats with murderous designs on each other are sharing a campfire. One is strumming a guitar and singing an old gospel song called "Life is Like a Mountain Railroad." He stops and asks the other fellow in a taunting manner, "Is life really like a mountain railroad?" "Nah," the other replies. "Then what is life like?" asked the first character. "Mister," came the reply, "life ain't like nothing I ever heard of before." That takes care of what life is all about, and I can vouch for it. I can assure the graduates here that life ain't going to be like anything you ever heard of before. Nevertheless, nothing in my experience has contradicted what I absorbed in my youth in South Carolina, and I remember it well. I remember the names of the 6 Confederate generals from Camden, enshrined in the Pantheon, where I played as a kid. Canty, Chestnut, Diaz, Kennedy, Kershaw, and Villepiguet. There are still echoes in my mind, the sound of the hours struck by the old bell in the clock tower of the Opera House in Newbury, where for a dime on Saturdays I could join my peers in tribute to Ken Maynard and Hoot Gibson, and even witness the last death throes of live vaudeville in America. I remember it well. I remember some other things whenever I return to a thriving and beautified South Carolina. I remember a South Carolina that was too poor to paint and too proud to whitewash. And the more fiercely the current national debate rages about the appropriate role of the federal government and its various programs, the more clearly I remember a South Carolina, before there was such a role, when states' rights ruled and enterprise was free to do as it pleased. I remember when the destitute aged were sheltered not in the bosom of a warm and loving family, but in country poor farms. Then Social Security came and tore those poor houses down, freeing young and old alike of that specter. When I note that the now flourishing institutions of higher learning spread across the state, I remember when some fine little colleges were one jump ahead of the sheriff, were hard-pressed to put meals on their student tables, and couldn't meet their payrolls. They were rescued and made solvent by the National Youth Administration, wartime training programs, and the GI Bill of Rights. When I see now the clear waters of our rivers, I remember when the Broad, the Wateree, the Bush, and the Saluda ran brick red from the erosion of farms and deforested uplands. The Soil Conservation Service and the millions of trees planted by the 30 or so CCC camps that were placed in South Carolina had something to do with the improvement. Free enterprises such as the paper and forest product industries shared abundantly in the benefits of these government initiatives. I remember when kerosene lit the farms of this land until the REA electrified and humanized them, bridging the cultural gap between town and country, and incidentally creating new markets for the appliance industry. When I hear complaints about affirmative action, I remember some mean things that used to happen in this land in the treatment of people by people. While we still have a way to go, does anyone really think we would have approached our present level of equity and civility without the intervention of the federal government? I have met no South Carolinian who had expressed to me any desire to return to the old days of racial cruelty and exclusion. I did not come here today to organize, but to philosophize. Yet, when I hear it said that Southern working people have some cultural aversion to the exercise of the right of freedom of association, I cannot help but remember the old days when cotton mills sometimes bristled with National Guard bayonets and machine guns to enforce that alleged aversion. Still today the question returns to my mind. If Southern workers don't want their own unions, why have states and corporations found it so expedient to collaborate in forging measures to thwart the effective pursuit of that aspiration? Lest it be thought that these reflections are just another expression of outmoded liberal balderdash, let me point out that such stout conservatives as Jason Burns, Olin Johnson, and Burnett Maybank were among the authors of the larger federal role that helped bring the state into the modern age. I do not counsel worship at the altar of government for its own sake, for I share the wholesome antipathy to the government, federal, state, or local, unrestrained by strong, free, and private institutions, for one of which I speak. I do suggest that the citizens of a modern republic should not go too far in support of those who would dismantle or ruin the benign capacity of their government, for they may need it badly someday. When it happens to you, you'll know it's true. As for those terms, liberal and conservative, as one who has been afflicted by both labels, depending on the stance of the afflictor and the foreign or domestic nature of the issue, I doubt their utility in this day and age for anyone except slapdash journalists. Real meaning has surely been drained from a term when the clammy hand of fashion appears in the form of a hyphen preceded by neo, as in neoconservative and neoliberal. In all areas of human discourse, neo-hyphen is a sure sign of something that is not long for this world. If, as has been said, a modern liberal is someone who believes that his country's adversaries are probably right, I strongly reject that label. And what is the objective meaning of the word conservative when its leadership has brought us a $200 billion annual deficit, put forward a measure that will mindlessly gut our defense forces year after year, and now, in the wake of Geneva, escorts clamoring hordes of businessmen east in pursuit of Moscow gold, exposing to that evil empire the soft underbelly of freedom, the stateless avarice of capital. Hear now the words of Shakespeare in Henry IV on this matter. From the Orient to the drooping West, stuffing the ears of men with false reports. I speak of peace, while covert enmity, under the smile of safety, wounds the world. Today's graduates ought not waste too much time about worrying about which category they ought to fit. There may be a few pure liberals and pure conservatives about who march in lockstep, but I don't really know any, present parties included. The great rank and file of the American people are liberal about some things and conservative about others, and the shifting distribution of such impulses depend largely upon circumstances and interest. That is the way it should be, because there really are things one ought to be conservative about and things one ought to be liberal about, and they do change. I owe to Sidney Hook a thought that I offer as my final conclusion from all this. From him I learned the difference between a truth and a deep truth. A deep truth is a truth, the converse of which is equally true. For example, it is true, as Santayana said, that those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Yet it is equally true that those who do remember the past may not know when it is over. That is a deep truth. Thank you, and good luck to you all.